In the past, we've talked a lot about, I mean, Star Wars. We've talked plenty of Star Wars. We've talked plenty of D&D, and staying in the same realm, or obviously by the title, we're going to be talking about Lord of the Rings, and this is all encompassing. So, the movies, the books, any other media, video games, like, Shadow of Mordor and all that stuff. We'll talk about anything and everything. But Ryan, do you want to start the question?
Sure. Starting off from wow, gosh, did I just voice crack? Starting off with a wonderful vocal achievement. Starting off, what is it about Tolkien that changed fantasy from, say, old wives' tales and like Beowulf and like the old Greek myths to like what turned into mainstream media? Like what made Lord of the Rings the thing?
And I feel like that's like whenever someone tries to write fantasy or whenever
Sorry,
you
you
see
should introduce
fantasy.
this person.
Oh,
Sorry.
Oh,
right.
this is Connor from Among Us with the Boys.
Hello, I'm back. Um, I totally forgot what I was about to say. Wow. Uh,
Something about fantasy. Sorry.
oh yeah, right. I feel like that's a common trope and often a critique of whenever people try to write or talk about fantasy is it always points back to Tolkien, like he's kind of become the staple, and it's got to be like every fantasy world has to have orcs and dwarves and elves, you know. I feel like he kind of set the standard for fantasy going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, I think it's pretty obvious to talk about um the stuff he's come up with. I mean, stuff that's so common right now, like if you're, we've talked about D&D. If you're playing D&D, there's going to be dwarves and elves. Like
Yeah.
in any fantasy game or something, there's usually dwarves and elves, and that originates from Tolkien's world of I mean, it's insane to think about how he just like came up with those like whole races, and then he wrote the language. It's crazy, dude.
Yeah, and not to say Tolkien invented the concept of elves and dwarves, but that kind of form of elf and dwarf, that style is kind of what's become the most common. With
Yeah,
elves, they're
yeah.
graceful and beautiful, and they live in the woods and shoot bows. And dwarves, they're drinkers who live in the mountains and who are obsessed with jewels and all that sort of stuff. Like, there's other versions and types of like elves and dwarves, but the one that Tolkien used has become kind of the most recognizable form
Mhm.
beyond, I guess, Santa's elves or something like that.
Yeah,
Let's
you're
be
right.
real. They're gnomes.
And then like from that stuff that he like kind of like made like more mainstream, like it it let other people later take those and then create like more things out of it, like dark elves. I don't know if maybe Tolkien maybe came up with dark elves. I'm not sure, but like the Drow and stuff. Like, I'm not I'm not super like historical about what came from where, but it stemmed from Tolkien.
So basically, what we've just been saying is that Tolkien kind of set the bar for fantasy. Like, what was it about his world that drew so many people to it is what we're trying to figure out. But just knowing that Tolkien has kind of set a precedent for fantasy that most other people are kind of forced to follow
I
whenever they're
think
trying
I
to write
think the
fantasy.
biggest reason that he gets there's a few reasons here, but like okay, so there's a few. There's like he made it very systematic, which kind of drew people into like the system of there being an elves and all these different groups like elves, dwarves, like that's nice to have that system, and that continued to grow into more sub races and sub races, and people like that. But more than that, and more than like even like all like the systems and all that he created, that's beautiful and cool. I think the biggest thing that attracts people to Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and all of it is because it's a human story. all
Oh,
of it. I mean,
absolutely.
for different audiences, The Hobbit versus Lord of the Rings, and then the Silmarillion, which is the deeper and most nerdy level. But like, they're a human story, because I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. He wrote this right after World War One.
Yeah, yeah. After World War One, Tolkien was a soldier in the British Army. They actually made kind of a movie about his life a while back, and I watched it and I liked it. But it did talk about like his experiences in World War One. He fought in one of the bloodiest battles of the entire war, the Battle of the Somme, and
Yeah,
that's kind of what inspired him for Mordor, was his battles in Europe during the First World War. That's kind of what inspired the landscapes of Mordor and those other places like that.
yeah. Which is, I'm just realizing something. Sorry, a bit of a side note, but I'm just realizing why it was easier to make orcs instead of like an enemy that was human. And there were other people that were like humans and people, but I'm realizing kind of why, and how it could have been harmful in some ways, but like why it was necessary as a human in a war to make the villain monsters. I'm
Yeah,
just realizing like the reason that I feel like he did that is because
and of
when you can make
course,
them these alien monsters instead of people like you don't have to worry about, any after or anything. I don't know. I'm
oh
just kind
yeah,
of putting that together.
and I mean, obviously, there's still evil men who were coerced by Sauron, the Haradrim, the Corsairs, the Easterlings, but the majority of Sauron's evil forces were orcs, and Sauron himself wasn't even a man. He was a Maiar spirit, like a lesser god. So he wasn't even really a man himself, too. So yeah, that kind of helps with that.
Yeah. It's the dehumanization of the things that make us too scared to look at. And I think that's a really interesting thing that I hadn't really thought about before. Something else, sorry if I keep talking, but it's watching Lord of the Rings from the perspective of someone who had never seen them before. Our friend Jaden, he's been on a couple of times, but he hadn't seen Lord of the Rings before ever. And so we were watching them with him, and it's really interesting because like you watch them with that person who hasn't seen them before, you get drawn to the perspective of the person who hasn't seen them. You're like, you start to notice things, you start to like just pull back in your seat and realize just how weird and beautiful this is, just going into it, with that kind of newer perspective. And especially at the end of Return of the King,
Oh
where
my gosh.
and I just kind of looked at Jaden and like, because he knew, because we'd been talking to him about it, and like we were both just realizing that he had written this right after World War One, watching Frodo's journey and just going, oh gosh, understanding so much more about that character because of what Tolkien experienced, and like sometimes there are wounds that cut too deep and all that. That just like it hit on a different level. So like I feel like it's very necessary for me to always understand Tolkien's point of view when writing the books, or well, reading the movies, or sorry, oh gosh, watching the movies or reading the books. Like I can never forget that now after like seeing that from that perspective. It's just I don't know. It's so weird, like how like we're always drawn to like World War One and World War Two because of like those intense stories. No, they're not the only ones. Like that's where fantasy comes from. Is like the Iliad and like Homer and all of those like they come from a place of conflict and adventure. That's always where they come from. And so I think
Yeah,
it's really interesting that like the Iliad of our age comes from the biggest conflict. So it's like it's always that same pattern, and I think that's really interesting. Which kind of makes you
yeah.
wonder like what stories will come from like the conflicted world that we live in right now.
Oh yeah, totally. And it talks about how Tolkien drew a lot of his inspirations for writing the books from works of like fantasy, old tales like Homer and Odysseus and Beowulf and all those other things. But those tales had already been told before, and through his perspective and after his experiences, it's what gave us his world, his kind of interpretation of fantasy, which like we said, has set the bar from then on.
Yeah. Just to backtrack a little bit, Ryan, you were talking about like watching it for the first time, quote unquote, watching it for the first time. And I think like this is just a little side note, like we don't have to talk about this that much, but like I think that's why I like to watch like people react to things, because like if they're like a new trailer comes out, like The Mandalorian season 2 or Star Wars or like a new Marvel movie, like I watch the trailer and then I go and look up people who also watched it, and there's like a couple of people that I found that are funny, and I usually just watch their reactions, and I may not be subscribed to them, but I just watch their reactions because it's like watching it for the first time, but also sometimes you kind of like can get in the way of yourself, like watching someone react and then like them not reacting to a part you freaked out about. You get like a little like angry. You're like, what? Like, was that not surprising or something? And so like watching movies with people, like it gives you an experience like the first time, but it's not truly the first time. But like I think a lot of us just wish so badly to watch things for the first time again, because it's an unforgettable experience and we just want to have that again. And sometimes like we don't realize that we're having that moment doing something or watching something new, and then it's too late when you realize, oh, like I just experienced this and maybe I wasn't fully invested. So like if someone watched Star Wars and wasn't really paying attention and then kind of was like confused, they're like, but now they know the story, so they can't watch it more intently next time because they already know what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's a weird feeling, especially or like with Star Wars and Lord of the Rings especially. I mean, those were movies that were just on and existed growing up. Like they weren't like something that I remember like seeing for the first time ever.
Oh
because
yeah.
they were just exist. I mean, I walked in on my parents like watching the like, oh my gosh, Shelob scene and just freaking out, like just as a kid, just going to bed with nightmares because, well, it's terrifying. It was just something that just, I mean, my parents are nerds. Like I've got a picture from like, well, it's the poster, the old Return of the King poster that my dad stole from the movie theater, on my wall.
That's
so, like,
great.
It's just always there.
I will say though, if the only experience anyone's ever had to Tolkien is the Lord of the Rings movies, then that's still good. Like they're great adaptations, and if that's all anyone's been exposed to, that's definitely way better than something like The Hobbit.
Oh, Connor,
trust me, we'll get there.
Do you want to start having this conversation?
We'll get there. Let's keep talking about the good stuff.
We'll get there when we get there.
Oh gosh.
I mean, like, and I'm on board with you, Ryan. Like, I don't get angry when people say, you know, the book's always better. It's like a saying, but I'm still like, you know, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But also, I'm super biased because I watched the Lord of the Rings movies first, and I watched the Harry Potter movies first, and then I read the book. So there's probably some bias involved. But also, you know, it's like the question of, do you want to know what things look like and be able to imagine it in your head better when reading the book, or do you want to be able to create your own world? Because there's like pros and cons to both, and I feel like I'm someone who wants, like, I mean, I don't want it, like I still will imagine things differently maybe if I didn't like him in the movie, but it's still like there, like you still know that, you know, the filmmaker made it this way, and then it's like just kind of in your head.
Yeah, so I think the biggest like example of that is just like when I read Lord of the Rings, Viggo Mortensen for me just is Aragorn.
Oh
like,
yeah,
that's just what Aragorn looks like to me in my head.
And obviously that has to do with the phenomenal casting that they chose for the movie. Like,
which he wasn't even the first choice.
Yeah, which is the crazy thing to me, because pretty much every single person in that movie is perfect for their role, with a few exceptions. But like those characters, those actors have just become the characters for me.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, it's weird because, like, for me, Elijah Wood is not Frodo when I read the books. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, he's just... I always imagine him very, very differently when I read the books. Like, Elijah Wood did a great job, but I don't know. Like I always imagine him a little bit more different in the books. A little bit more like,
Sam though.
carefree throughout. I don't know.
Samwise Gamgee, dude. He's
Obviously,
big.
obviously, film and books are two very different mediums, and people often compare books and movies so closely, but they're two very different storytelling devices, you know? And it it almost feels unfair to compare books and movies like that by saying the books are better, the movies are better. They're just so different, and they have to be based on how if they're a good movie or a good book, not which counterpart is better.
Yeah, and I think because well, at this point we're here in the conversation, so let's dig into The Hobbit, the movie.
Oh boy, here we go.
Okay. Let me just say my opinion before Connor explodes. I think the movies are phenomenal in their own right. They're not like the books. They were told, and they weren't even told to be like Lord of the Rings books. They were told to be like the Lord of the Rings movies, because the entire time with like The Hobbit is that like they're trying to sell it. You know, that's why like for some reason, uh, oh my gosh, Orlando Bloom's there. You know, and Evangeline Lilly. Like, why? Why? Okay, I guess you're here. You know, I once I get past that, like them selling it, I have to like put The Hobbit in its own like little place and just say you are separate from the Lord of the Rings movies and you are separate from all the books. And once I do that, I'm okay with it and I love it. Because I mean,
And
how can you not love like the dwarves being like on the table in like Bilbo's house? How can you not imagine that in any other way? Like to me that's just like it's just the purest of like the Lord of the Rings moments, or just I don't know, like all of it. The rest of it, like with Smaug and all that, might not be directly how it happened, but like I enjoy it thoroughly.
And I totally agree with you. If I had never seen the Lord of the Rings movies or never read the books, I would think that the Hobbits they're fine movies on their own. But you have to realize that
They're not.
the way they were made, they were trying to be like the Lord of the Rings because there were 5 studios and a whole mess of people who needed this movie to be like the Lord of the Rings, you know, a massive success.
Well, yeah, because
And
I mean, how could you not go up? That's the point of like selling a movie. Like you have to keep going up, right? So
yeah,
you'd have to go up from Lord of the Rings, like, which is what they did. But you know,
And like I think that the first 30 45 minutes of The Hobbit are some of the best in the entire trilogy. Even some of the best of Tolkien, like the Unexpected Party. I think those scenes are just done so
just
well.
pure, you know, and
But
all
it
that with the
just
trolls. Then they
oh
bring in
yeah,
Azog, and you're like, wait, why is Azog here? Isn't he like 500 years
dead.
dead?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing with The Hobbit for me is it's not because there's a lack of good. There's just way
So
too
much.
much added to it that didn't need to be there. Like actually there's a really great YouTube series by Lindsay Ellis that talks about The Hobbit, and originally it was supposed to be a 2-part film directed by Guillermo del Toro, but del Toro he left the project, and Peter Jackson had to step in with only a month for pre-production for the entire movie, and then a month before An Unexpected Party was supposed to release, they changed it to 3 films instead of 2. So the thing is, there was just I really, really wanted The Hobbit to be good, and they kept some of the pre-production, but when they scrapped everything and just basically had to start from scratch, there were just so many problems with it that it just felt I don't know. It's just why it didn't work for me because there was just so many production problems and everything. Like there was potential there for
This
a
is the
really, really
same
great
problem that we
movie.
have with guess what? The sequel trilogy.
Exactly. Exactly.
They were
Like
trying to sell something, it got messy, and then it just didn't work.
I actually was thinking there's like a shocking amount of similarities between the sequel trilogy of Star Wars and the Hobbit films because like they both started out good. They like posed a bunch of questions. They
Except the
introduced the
Hobbit can
world in a
stand on
new
its own.
light. Well, that's true. But as they went along, they just became more and more focused on money and epics and trying to make you remember the first films that came out, which were good. And then I don't know.
Well, like,
Once you get to Battle of Five Armies, it just becomes so clear that they were more focused on battle sequences than they were on telling a good story. Like, I
if
still
you
think the first two are good, but the third one I just can't stand by it.
if you got rid of Azog, it would be fantastic. And then if you went further to get rid of why was Legolas there and make like the elf woman's like character a little bit maybe smaller and got rid of the weird love story right there.
Yeah. Like,
if you did
one
that,
of the things
it would
one of the
be
things I learned about
phenomenal.
it is like they were more focused on what the focus groups liked than what actual fans of this universe would like. They were more focused on the mainstream and what most people would like, which I can understand. They want to sell the movie, but they just shoehorned in so much stuff that the focus groups would like that it kind of derailed film, at least in
I
my
think
opinion.
they just lost the feeling of Tolkien, and they were telling a cool fantasy story, but it wasn't Tolkien, you know. Like,
Yeah,
sure, they were using like the
absolutely.
skeletal remains of the lore that they just kind of went, okay, we're just gonna throw this all together, and it was cool. But I honestly feel like that's exactly what happened with the sequels. They just didn't have a real plan, and the entire time they were just trying to sell it. You know,
Yeah,
Seems
I
like
don't think Tolkien
our
was ever about selling anything. He was about telling a
a great
heartfelt,
story.
beautiful story that is set in a fantastical world that people could relate to and actually experience. And the thing is, like, I guess we're going here now, but like, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings are so different because you were saying this earlier before we started recording, but The Hobbit was a story written for his children. And then when
Hmm.
he wrote The Lord of the Rings, they were older. So it was a more mature and, you know, story that he thought they were ready for.
Yeah, and one thing I've learned about with the Hobbits was that Tolkien never actually meant for the Hobbit to be, or for the Lord of the Rings to be a sequel to the Hobbit. Instead, he wanted it to be a sequel to the Silmarillion, because like he wrote the Hobbit without plans to expand on the universe, without plans to do the Lord of the Rings at all. But when his children grew up, he wanted to tell them a more mature version of that
That's
fantasy
really
story.
interesting. I love that.
Yeah, and like he expanded upon the world with the Silmarillion, which he Tolkien loved the Silmarillion, and that's where the Lord of the Rings came from, not the Hobbit, and that's why the filming for the Hobbit was in kind of a stuck between a rock and a hard place from the beginning, because the
They just
Hobbit,
weren't supposed to be the same.
yeah, absolutely, but they were trying too hard to make it that way because the Lord of the Rings made a lot of money, and like the Lord of the Rings, it was made before the Hobbit movies, so people expected it to be a film like The Lord of the Rings based on a book that wasn't.
And I mean, like, Battle of the Pelennor Fields, I mean, all of that, how could you, like, it's weird because how can you, I want more of like an indie film kind of style of like The Hobbit that's maybe, I want it smaller and redone. Similar, you can keep a few of the actors, whatever, I don't care, but like just tone it down and give us the baby epic of the Bilbo story for children. Like,
And
give us that story.
The thing about the Hobbit is it's not a three-act structure. It's more of an episodic story meant to be read to children a chapter a night. It's not split up to be a three-part Hollywood film. But the thing is, they tried to take that existing structure that wasn't three parts and split it into 9 parts. So you get in the Hobbit, you get these forced climaxes and just story beats that go nowhere because the Hobbit wasn't made to be adapted into a film. Maybe
Yeah.
a TV show or a cartoon, but not this epic Hollywood movie. And I
Oh,
think
I
that's one
would
of the
love
biggest
to see a
problems.
cartoon redone today with like maybe an older 80s styled like, you know, animation like we've been seeing that's actually coming back, but like do that for The Hobbit. Do you know how cool that would be?
Absolutely.
Like even bring in Ian McKellen for the voice of Gandalf and all that, but like okay, but what was the stuff with like the necromancer and like Sauron?
The
What
thing
what
is,
what was that?
the thing is, well, first of all, Tolkien never really meant for the necromancer to be Sauron. It was more of just an excuse to get Gandalf away from the party so that the story could progress with just
Yeah.
the dwarves and Bilbo. But they added Sauron in just for the
To
reason we
connect
keep
it and make it
talking
feel like,
about.
oh gosh, this is what was
Do they
happening. Like,
know
I
what
was
a
going to happen.
necromancer is?
It's pretty. I feel like it's the beginnings of a lich.
I don't see
Yeah.
Sauron raising skeletons out of the ground. Like what?
He's just building an orc army, so the word necromancer like doesn't even fit there.
I mean, it sort of makes sense for around that time, but he's not the necromancer. He's not.
And
Sauron was
one of
already
the
back, right?
yeah, I think at that point Sauron was
Okay,
already
sorry.
back.
Side note, though, but like, okay, sorry. Order of publishing here. He wrote The Hobbit,
Yes.
and did he write that like privately, or did he publish that first?
He published that first, but he was working on the Silmarillion
So then
while
after that,
he
he
was
was working on the
writing
Silmarillion,
The Hobbit.
and then after that, so which one
he
was
actually
published
started
then?
he actually started the Silmarillion before The Hobbit was even written, but he wrote The Hobbit, and then he was working on the Silmarillion, and I don't know if that was published before or after Lord of the Rings, but I do know it was started before The Hobbit, but The Hobbit was published first.
Well, we have mobile devices, as they call them across the pond. You can just
Yeah, go ahead. Look it up.
My thoughts on the Hobbit movies are just, that like you said, Ryan, you want to like try and separate them because you want to enjoy the movies because no one likes to hate a movie they wanted to do good, but I think that's the problem is that when you watch the movies, you're thinking about like, oh, like this could have been something magical because the book is magical, and maybe some people just call it like, oh, it's a kid's story. I'm like, well, yeah, but it's also really, really good, and it's
Just because it's for kids doesn't mean it can't be good.
yeah, it's like a fantastical wonder story, and maybe it's not super climactic. It doesn't have a bunch of epic battles and you just throwing a ring into a volcano, but a thief trying to steal from a dragon. Like that's a classic fantasy story. But I think like one of the things that gets me most about the movies, like I love Martin Freeman as Bilbo.
Oh,
Like
absolutely.
he is a good Bilbo, and some of the dwarves, I liked the dwarves, but they
I
just
love
didn't
the
have
dwarves.
enough presence in the movies. Like you didn't get to know them that
Yeah,
well.
that was annoying though, because like it's about a hobbit and a bunch of dwarves, and like they spent too much time with other stuff. I feel like we didn't get that as much.
I know.
Yeah.
And the other the
And I
other thing
love Thorne's character arc in the movie though. Ugh.
yeah, it's just
Yeah.
like there's so many things, and while it is fiction, there are things in The Hobbit that just are unrealistic. If you catch my meaning. So if you think about the Battle of Helm's Deep, think about like just how real that feels. I mean, like
Hmm.
the stunt, like the shield surfing down the stairs, like okay, that's a little, but it's not that
Regular.
bad.
Get over
And
yourself.
they did it practically. Maybe he was hooked up to wires or whatever, but he's an elf, and it's just showing you what elves do. But elves should not be able to jump on falling
Oh my
bricks and
gosh.
leak up. And that's not the only thing. I think like another
Yeah,
dumb
what was
thing
that?
is freaking Bard's bow. He has these gigantic black arrows that are supposed to be shot from like a war machine catapult thing.
The
You cannot
dwarven
And
shoot
then
them from your
lance.
boy's shoulder. I'm
yeah, and
sorry.
then yeah, and then he brings the arrows up with him to shoot Smog as if he's gonna just put it in his bow, but he's like, oh shoot, it broke. Guess I'll make it into a crossbow. It's like I'm sure the black arrows in the books were not that big. They were just
No, they weren't.
extremely well forged arrows, but they were shot from a bow. He's the bow man. He's not the crossbow
crossbow man.
slash my son guy.
Yeah, no, in
And
the books, Bard's black arrow is just one that his father handed down. It's like a family heirloom for him. And that's one of the biggest differences between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings established its own rules and then followed them. Whereas The Hobbit didn't really follow those rules. It just kind of did like whatever it wanted, including bouncing around a fat dwarf in a barrel for 3 minutes straight and not showing any harm to him it's like the dwarves are made of rubber. Like, except for Keeley getting shot with an arrow, they never really experience a lot of pain outside of the Battle of the Five Armies, where a couple of them die. But like, it's just so hard to believe in this world when it keeps doing stunts like that
Which is
you
such a
have no reason to
weird
believe.
conversation to be having when you're talking about a fantastical world like Lord of the freaking Rings. That you're
Yeah.
like, it's not believable. But like that's the difference. Like that's the difference. It's fantastical, but it's believable because it's relatable,
like,
because it's a real story. That's what Lord of the Rings, the movies, and well, the books and all that felt like, because they felt real. You know, the Hobbit was just like, you can't present that in the same way.
it interests me in the Lord of the Rings movies how when Gandalf uses magic, it's not like a fireball. It's not like a a blue aura. He creates a light, but it's kind of like a flame inside his staff. I think the most like mad like D&D fantasy looking magic he does is when he runs out onto Pelennor Fields while Faramir is being brought back from Osgiliath, and
I just got chills when you
he
said
blinds he blinds the Nazgul. Like that's the most, and like he blinds the orcs at Helm's Deep as well, but that like in that
That's
shot
just the sun,
it looks,
really.
yeah, it just looks
that
more like
moment,
he's
or like
using
when he
his
shatters
sun.
Saruman's staff.
Oh yeah.
And like your staff is broken, but when him and Sauron are fighting, I mean, they're just using the force on each other, man. Like they're just throwing each other around, but it's not like a magical beam is grabbing him and throwing him around. And I don't know if that was just a choice by Peter Jackson or whoever, because in The Hobbit, when he's blocking Sauron's, I don't know, like black energy, he does the Lord of the Rings conquest like block magic thing. It's like
ground
it
slam,
like,
yeah.
but it also sort of looks like
Yeah,
just like
what was
light,
that?
but it's like a shield around him. So I
Yeah.
just
I
find
think
that
that, yeah, it's
interesting.
the same thing about the rules. Like Gandalf is an angel. His magic is divine, and that's what mages are in Lord of the Rings. They're the angels sent from before. You know,
Yeah, they're
sorry,
lesser
not Zelda,
gods
that's D&D.
sent.
But like that just wasn't how it felt in The Hobbit. Like he was just this like powerful wizard with endless magic, you know, and it was cool. But like, what?
If we hadn't seen that version of Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, it would have been more believable and it would have been fun to watch. But the thing is about Gandalf, his purpose isn't to blast powerful enemies with magic spells. He was given the Elven Ring of Fire to inspire the hearts of men so that they could fight back against Sauron. That was his purpose, to inspire, to use magic to inspire and rally the free
Not
peoples of
fight
Middle
the
Earth.
battles for them.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons why I love Gandalf as a character, because when you think of a wizard, you think of fireballs and lightning bolts and all this other D&D wizard stuff, but that's not what Gandalf is. He's more of a messenger and an inspirer rather than this powerful warrior.
The most
He
inspired
feels like an
Gondor
angel.
soldier is Pippin.
Let's be real.
What a
Like
moment,
honestly, like he
dude.
feels like an angel from Christian belief. Like he feels like an angel, you know, protecting armies, you know,
Especially when he's
protecting like
the white.
the adventurers, you know, and all that. But like he is not the like you can see him like defending like not Osgiliath.
Miss
Oh my, Minas Tirith. Gosh, sorry, I'm tired. When he's defending Minas Tirith, he's not like the and like the city is not like cleansed and all the Nazgul are like fleeing away. No, I mean that's not his purpose. I mean, heck, Frodo did more damage throwing the ring into the fire with all the ground and all that collapsing. No, I don't know how much of that was theatrical, but like he wasn't the main point. Like that's why I love the assist, like the way he's like just that assistant character, you know.
Yeah, and there's actually, I think I remember a part in the book of Return of the King when Gandalf and the princes of Dol Amroth, which is another kingdom in Gondor, are riding along the wall. Like for a brief moment, the soldiers are like they're relieved of the darkness that's pressing down on them. Like they feel hope, they feel courage, but it's lost as soon as Gandalf and the princes are out of view and they're left back to this gritty battle. And that's just why Gandalf is such a great character, because he's inspiring. He's not this
Yeah.
magical warrior.
And like I think like Gandalf's like obviously the most like quote unquote magical thing he does is blind the Nazguls, whatever. But
And I guess like
I
his
think
lightning sword against the Balrog. I guess
yeah,
that
that's also
count.
true.
that was pretty dope.
Yeah, that was sick. But like
But that was
again,
still
it's
him
like the
holding
sun
off
in
the-
Helm's Deep. He's using the elements as his weapon.
Yeah, like that was him. Like once again, like he was being super bad in that moment. Like it was to help the party do what they needed to do. He wasn't the main
Yeah.
character there. Still, you know.
I think the most like the most magic, like I said, the most magical thing, Gandalf, whatever. But I think the most like magical looking thing in the movies is when the Witch King raises his sword and like it starts like getting like sucked in with fire and stuff, and then he breaks Gandalf's sword. I think that's like the most magical thing. And I'm not crapping on like D&D magic. I mean, that stuff's awesome. Like watching Dumbledore versus Voldemort and their fight, like that stuff's cool. But when you have like the Lord of the Rings and it's established like magic, it's kind of weird to see, just Gandalf using the sun to blind his enemies, and then seeing Gandalf throw triple fireballs that all, when they hit, they do an area of effect damage that deals 10d6 damage that calls a lightning strike out of the sky. It's like it's different.
And I
Okay,
think it's
but
really great that way.
yeah, I think
It's like the
I
other
don't
ways
know.
are good too.
There's
This-
something just again so divine about Gandalf. Like, okay, the Green Brothers? They were arguing about like who would win in a fight, Dumbledore or Gandalf, and they were like, "Well, Dumbledore. He's obviously just more powerful, right?" And I'm like, "Okay, well, just no." And like, don't give me your Elder Wand excuses here. No, stop, because Gandalf is literally an angel sent from like the gods to help protect this world. He would beat Dumbledore if he had to.
And the thing is, that's like we've been saying, that's not his purpose. His purpose is
That's not
to
his purpose
inspire.
anyways. No.
Like, I'd love to see Dumbledore try to rally the troops of Minas Tirith to fight back. Like but they're just so different characters that I guess it's a bit of an unfair.
A pedestal with a little owl on it, like, students, we must protect this city.
10 points to Gondor.
I know.
10 points to Gondor. They're getting like rained with fire and death. Heads of
5
Gondorian
points to
soldiers
Rohan
being
for
like thrown
pulling
over the walls.
the best last-minute reinforcements ever.
Not to the discredit of Harry Potter. Harry Potter's great. It's just very different.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Which is weird because like as fantastical as that show is, you forget it's set in our world.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll have to do a Harry Potter podcast too. OJ, I mean, I guess you can't. Never mind. I just got really sad. Anyways,
dead, you guys.
The Lord of the Rings is awesome.
And
Right.
there's actually an interesting thought I had about the Fellowship of the Ring. Like this, it was released back in 2001 or like 1999, sometime around then. But this was back at a time before the MCU, before like expanded universes or trilogies were lucrative. This was a risk. Fellowship of the Ring was a huge risk because if that
Star
failed,
Wars.
Oh yeah,
the other
seriously. How
two
many other
movies-
projects?
okay, besides Star Wars, sorry.
I'm kidding. I'm sorry. It's okay.
But still, despite Star Wars' success, trilogies and expanded universes weren't that common at the time.
No,
And-
because how many other projects like died after the first movie?
Exactly. And the thing is, they had already signed contracts and were filming the other two movies at the exact same time. So if Fellowship tanked, it would have ruined New Line Cinema and like all the parties involved. But it's just such a good thing that it didn't.
Yeah. And like we mentioned at the start of the stream, or I don't know if it was in the question, but we were talking about like Tolkien's effect on. I always find it interesting how like since like maybe 2016 or just like these recent years, like nerd stuff is becoming way more mainstream, and like maybe it was like mainstream, but like a lot of people just kind of hid it and they weren't like super open about it because they were worried that if you were open about it, then you were gonna get bullied or whatever. but like hearing like jocks at school freaking out about Fortnite and talking about like being on their Xbox all the time playing Fortnite. I'm just like you have no reason to bully anyone anymore about doing crap because you literally are nerding out over Fortnite. Like I have my feelings about Fortnite, but like I understand that it was just popular, but like and they put Thanos in it and stuff, and people like I heard jocks at school talking about Thanos, dude, and people told Mr. Rigby he looked like Thanos because
Fortnite, not because
that's
Marvel, because Fortnite. Whatever.
yeah, and so like it's just becoming more mainstream. I mean, how many people are freaking out about the Mandalorian? I mean, they're so excited. Who would have thought
Yeah.
that people would like know what the word Mandalorian meant and see the helmet and be like, "Oh, it's Din Djarin." I'm like,
Dude,
"Bruh,
5 years
have
ago,
you
no one would have any idea. They'd be
read
like, oh,
the
Boba
lore?"
Fett? Like, how many people saw Jango Fett and just went, oh, Boba Fett?
And I think that's
I-
I think that's to the credit of the Lord of the Rings movies. It kind of broke the norm and started to introduce mainstream media to the more nerdy aspect of entertainment, like Harry Potter and Star Wars. I feel like Lord of the Rings and the
Definitely,
prequels
and,
had a
like-
good effect on making that a little more mainstream so that
Yeah.
more and more people could enjoy these amazing stories.
And not like the original trilogy of Star Wars didn't do that, but at the time, it was still a little bit more frowned. Like, people enjoyed them, but it wasn't like something that you like geeked out over, you know?
And if you
Mhm.
did geek out, then you probably got like picked on, which was dumb. It was really stupid, but like it was just what happened. Like I think Star Wars was a little more popular, but sort of like Back to the Future. And like I always tell people, like without the prequels, Star Wars would have probably became like Back to the Future. But like you were saying, like Lord of the Rings, I think just because the fact that they were such good movies, like they were just solid movies, and people probably were like they were probably more privy to the idea of just like medieval stuff because it's kind of realistic, whereas Star Wars is laser guns, but then you're kind of slowly introduced to magic. But again, like we were talking about, the magic is not fireball. It's just like it's like the divine energy. So it kind of like
you seen Rise of Skywalker?
it just slowly like put people into fantasy and was like this is really cool, but like these are good movies, but they also like subconsciously were probably like, holy crap, like this stuff's cool. So when Marvel came around,
Oh yeah.
man.
Also, another thing, before we get too off the topic of The Hobbit, like, we're talking about effects that these movies had. Well, I'm kind of still sad about the effect that The Hobbits had on, like, The Lord of the Rings and the culture, because the third movie, you may not know this, but the extended edition of the Battle of Five Armies is rated R for violence. There's so much fighting going on that it's rated R, and because of that, the Tolkien family actually took away all the rights everyone had to Lord of the Rings, and there was a period
that
of like,
movie did so much stuff. The Tolkien estate is brutal.
oh
Do you know how much stuff D&D and Wizards of the Coast went through after that? They had to change so many names and everything because they'd use like names like just fantasy creatures that they'd had from Tolkien, really, and they barely held on a few that they had, but like hobbits, they were still called halflings for a long time, but like any time that they were referred to as like hobbits did not go down well. And that wasn't just because of the Hobbit, but like sheesh, it's just weird.
Okay, yes, granted, the Tolkien family is a little bit uptight when it comes to their
No,
to the
but
rights
like
and stuff.
I'm just saying, like it wasn't just them. Like it was the Hobbit that forced their hand in a lot of that.
Yeah, and until like a few years ago when Shadow of Mordor came out, like there really wasn't a lot of Lord of the Rings media, no TV shows, no video games. All of it had come out before the Hobbits, like the Lord of the Rings Conquest, the Battle for Middle-earth, games like that. They came out before the Hobbit, and nothing came out after the Hobbit until recent years with Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War and
the Lord of the Rings Gollum.
I knew you were gonna say that.
Let's go.
Okay, can we talk about how good Shadow of Mordor is? It is just so good.
I gotta let you play it sometime, Ryan. Like
it's so fun.
So awesome.
Like,
it's like I think they kind of got around the legality stuff by calling it like the franchise is called Middle Earth, not the Lord of the Rings Shadow of Mordor. It's Middle Earth
yeah,
Shadow of Mordor. So it's set in the world, but it's not like I don't know, advertises the movie, but they're just really like good games that I think are, you want like with Star Wars games, you want Star Wars games that add to the universe. And we talked about canon before, and maybe you can have head canon or whatever, and some people argue like, oh, like if it's not canon, that doesn't mean it's cool, but but also like if it's not canon, that means no, like it's not going to be referenced in anything else. Whatever happens isn't going to have effects on anything because it's not canon. But I think in the case of the Shadow of Mordor series, they just got to play around, and you just got to feel like a boss,
oh,
dude.
absolutely. Like Shadow of Mordor, if you squint, it might be canonical. Like it could be, but Shadow of War, absolutely not. There's just way too many liberties taken with that.
No. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's different, but like the game's good and it like improved on the gameplay of the first game, but I don't think the story is as good as the
Oh
first
yeah,
one.
totally. But there are a lot of actually really good Lord of the Rings games out there. Like I played so many different Lord of the Rings games as a kid. Like there's the PlayStation 2. There were these games based off the movies where you could just play as the
Yeah.
Fellowship members and play through the games. And then there was the Battle for Middle Earth, which was real-time strategy where you could take control of the factions of Middle Earth. There's Shadow of Mordor. There's Lord of the Rings Conquest. Like there's actually a lot of really good Lord of the Rings games that people just haven't really heard of because they're so old.
And it just sucks that there's not that many because like you said, like I didn't play all of the movie based games. I played the Two Towers at my cousin's like a little bit, but
Dude,
we
that
did
one and
own
Return of the King bopped.
yeah, we did own Return of the King, and Return of the King is so fun. Like just
Mm-hmm.
being able to just pick your characters and like just playing as the characters. Like I know we were playing Conquest the other day and I was like freaking out about Aragorn, but it's just like fun to be the character, and like I like to think about move sets and all that stuff, and like Aragorn controlling the ghosts may not be like following the story of Return of the King that well, but it's just
It's so
awesome to
cool.
throw an army of like a small army of ghosts at people and just wreck them up, dude.
And that's one of the things that I really love about like these kind of stories, like Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, is the games that come out of it, because like they expand upon the universe and let you play in that universe, so you can feel kind of like a part of it.
Yeah, we should do a podcast, or I could do a stream and just talk about canceled Star Wars games because holy crap, dude, it's a
There's a lot.
tragedy. It's
It's a
almost as
graveyard.
tragic as Anakin Skywalker's story, dude. It's just the worst. It's sucky. But like because there's probably a lot of Lord of the Rings games that got canceled, but no one knows about them.
Because of
But
the
the fact
Hobbit.
yeah, the fact that we know the canceled games and we hear like what they were gonna be about, you're just like, oh my gosh, dude, how
Okay, but
sick would that be?
imagine for a second a Lord of the Rings Conquest 2, where you fought
My
in
gosh.
the battles of the North, because there was a whole nother war going on that wasn't in the movies, that isn't really talked about that much. But at the same time that Minas Tirith was being sieged, so was Erebor. Can you imagine playing through like that story and fighting in
Oh,
the battle
dude.
under the trees in Mirkwood? Can you imagine how great that would have been?
He's so cool.
But again, because of The Hobbit, the Tolkien family was much less willing to let people take Tolkien's story and make games about it, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, that's just rough, dude. Because you just think about all the possibilities, and it
Hmm
just makes you sad, just like the Rise of Skywalker. Because every podcast somehow finds its way back to the sequel trilogy.
Well, actually, I was that video series that I was talking about on YouTube about the Hobbit. There was actually one part where in it kind of like with Rise of Skywalker, the music felt more like a greatest hits melody than original music that really fit the scene, because there's one part at the end of An Unexpected Journey when Thorin is facing Azog at the very end when the forest is on fire and everything. But the music that you hear is the Nazgul theme. For some reason, the music that you hear when Thorin is fighting Azog is the Nazgul theme, which is kind of like what it was with The Rise of Skywalker. They just play the Force theme over and over again because people like the Force theme, right? Because it sounded good for that moment, even if it really didn't make sense. And that's kind of what it was with the Hobbits, is because of like what I said with the all the pre-production, the 2 years of pre-production getting scrapped. Howard Shore didn't really have all that much time to compose new music for this new story because of all the stuff that I talked about. So it just kind of ended up feeling more like greatest hits, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there is some really good new music. Like I really, really love Misty Mountains, the one that the dwarves sing.
Oh gosh.
And I think that theme is just phenomenal. But
if anything, The Hobbit gave us that, and that's
something. That's just so good.
Even the Ed Sheeran cover, that's just bomb.
Oh yeah,
so good.
Yeah.
Like to his credit, Howard Shore is just a phenomenal composer. Can we talk about how great that man is at composing?
Yeah. And
holy smokes!
You told me, Connor, that you like the video I sent to you where I think is it Nerd Writer? Don't remember.
I don't exactly remember.
He like made a video about just all like how the music just adds to the story. Kind of like how in 1917 the one shot thing is not just a cool gimmick, it's to add to the story. Like it's awesome, but it adds to the story.
Well, I'm a band kid, so I'm going to geek out about music for just a quick second. In The Lord of the Rings, Howard Shore primarily uses these things called leitmotifs, which are short musical phrases that are used to emphasize an idea or a person or a people. So what he does is he creates the Fellowship theme, which until you get to the Council of Elrond, you only hear fragments of it, little bits and pieces, and it's usually accompanied by In Dreams. But when you get that shot of the Fellowship all traveling, and you get the Fellowship theme in full force, it is so beautiful.
Yeah,
but once the Fellowship, and then once Gandalf falls and the Fellowship is fractured, even just a little bit, you don't hear the Fellowship theme in full force in its entirety ever again.
Well, that's
you lose instruments.
The reason that, like, I feel like, well, one of the reasons that the Lord of the Rings trilogy in the movies works so well.
It was the music.
That's just because, not just the music, but because the composer was along with the story the entire along the way. But not just that, because he was giving feedback. He was, it was a cooperative, but it was an idea working together, and they weren't changing things the last minute trying to, sell it or not. They were just telling an honest story,
Yeah. And one of my favorite things about Return of the King is the fact that the theme for Into the West, which is the song that plays in the credits, starts showing up once Gandalf talks to Pippin about like the White Shores Beyond. That's one of my favorite scenes in all of cinema, not just the Lord of the Rings. It's such a great moment when he's talking about the next life, and you hear that theme for Into the West, which is played when Frodo leaves for Valinor or at the end of the series and stuff. Into the West is so good, and so is all of Howard Shore's work with The Lord of the Rings.
Dude.
It's just...
I mean, what moment isn't awesome in Lord of the Rings?
Seriously. But I just feel like John Williams got so shortchanged in Rise of Skywalker, and in the beginning they kept him on, and he was like, okay, I think I know what's going on, but then they just kept changing things and going, I don't think people will like that. And I'm just like, it comes back to the point of they were trying to sell it instead of just making a good story. And if they just kept going with that, John Williams would have been able to make a fantastic and phenomenal track that went wrong with the entire thing.
And John Williams is a phenomenal composer, and he actually did some really good work with the Star Wars sequels. Like the end of the Emperor's theme is Kylo Ren's theme, just changed just a little bit.
And how he utilized Rey's theme throughout.
I love Rey's theme. He
pulled stuff from the prequels into Rey's theme. Like, it was just, they just weren't able to work together.
Yeah,
and that's just one of the regrets.
like there are some great music in the sequels, but there are also just some tracks that just aren't like you don't get any emotion out of them. But like watching the prequels, almost every song is new. It all like obviously at some points they bring back some original trilogy music, but it's new and it's engaging. Like Escape from Naboo is
Across
exciting.
the Stars.
Duel of the Fates is sick.
Beautiful.
Battle of the Heroes
I
is
mean,
just
dude,
heartbreaking.
how can you? So good.
And I feel like that's one of the strengths of the Lord of the Rings. You know, it's not necessarily something that I'll just like listen to in the car, but it's when I hear it, it just makes me love the Lord of the Rings even more because those ideas that the director and the writers are trying to get across is so reinforced by the
They
music.
work together, you know, instead of being like, oh crud, we have to throw this together and make it work. Story, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I just love the music in the Lord of the Rings so
It's
much.
so good,
It's
man.
so good.
It's so good.
Okay, how about favorite moments from the Lord
I
of
was
the Rings
just about to
movies?
ask that. I was just about to ask that. No way.
Nice.
Ugh.
Who
You
wants to
got.
go
We gotta
first?
pick 3.
Let's start with Fellowship.
We gotta
Let's start
pick
Fellowship.
3. I can't pick one moment, dude. We gotta pick
Let's
3.
pick one moment from each movie.
Okay.
Okay, that's fair.
Let's talk favorite moments from each movie. Let's start with Fellowship.
Okay. Fellowship, the one for me has to be Boromir with Aragorn at the end. If we're talking about the movie, because Boromir is like everyone like. I mean, you hate Boromir, right? But he's always one of my favorite characters because it shows the ability to change. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I love that. Like, okay, there's a line from the Joker, right? You know, when people are about to die, they show you who they really are. Boromir showed us who he really was at that end moment, and like, it's just I don't know, it's so inspiring to me the way he's like, "I'm sorry, I screwed up.
And
I'm sorry. Protect them."
that's one of
You know?
the things that I love about Lord of the Rings. Is like people talk about the Hobbit because it made changes, but making changes from book to movie isn't necessarily a bad thing because Boromir was heavily changed in book to movie because Tolkien didn't really care that much about Boromir, but when it came to the movie, they gave him motivations and a friendship with the hobbits, which made his death that much more emotional.
And then Faramir to back it up.
And then
Absolutely.
the continued backstory that you get in Return of the King and a little bit in Two Towers, you know, it's just he's one of my favorite characters because like he's prideful, but he's trying his best, and then he does change, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. That's probably my favorite scene in The Fellowship. I don't know.
All right, Connor, you
Emotionally,
go.
it's my
Let's
favorite
stick with
scene.
this order. So you go, Connor.
Okay. I honestly think I don't know. I still have to think about this. I don't really know at right now what my favorite is. So Ryan or Justin, you go, and I'll come back to me.
Okay. I think both these moments are the same. Like they're different scenes, but they have like sort of the same, I don't know, message. I mean, if I would have thought of Boromir's death, that probably would have been it. But you know, I want to talk about different things. But I love Sam trying to swim after Frodo in the boat, and also Sam, you know, when he's like you said the video where the guy edited the Sam stepping like one step away from home, which was funny, but like that moment really like I just love like I think people get it the wrong idea when you say, you know, show don't tell in movies because if you show it's a lot deeper, but don't tell, but you're showing through the dialogue. So through the dialogue between Sam and Frodo, you're showing Sam's character that
it was just an authentic moment.
Yeah, he's never like the farthest he's gone is still in the cornfields of the Shire. He's never gone past there. And he knows the fact that he knows how far he's been is like knowing how like he's always keeping track of how close he is to home. But he's also it's showing you how loyal he is that he's gonna step over that line or jump into the water and swim after Frodo
because of a promise he made to Gandalf.
Yeah, because he is the Hufflepuff. I'm sorry, any
Hufflepuffs here? I'm a Hufflepuff. Are you guys?
Samwise
Hufflepuff as well.
is the man for the job.
Gamgee's the man.
Okay, so I think one of my favorite scenes is in the extended edition in Lothlorien when Aragorn is talking with Boromir, and Boromir's talking about how Galadriel talked to him in his mind and saying like Galadriel told him that there's still hope, but he just can't see it. And he starts talking about the White City and how like the trumpets will call their kings home, and it just adds so much more weight to Boromir's eventual death when he calls Aragorn like his king, because they talked about that and how Aragorn promises that he won't let the White City fall. When they're talking about that in Lothlorien, just makes it so much better. And that's one of the scenes that I really, really wish would have made the theatrical.
Is it that when he
That's a
drops
really good
Narsil?
scene. All of it though, with like
No, that's in That's in Rivendell.
the morning Gandalf right there. That's a really powerful scene too.
Wait, where's Lothlorien? Oh, never mind. I'm dumb.
After
Okay.
the Mines of Moria.
Sorry, my bad.
But yeah,
I
when
kinda
Galadriel tells
forget
him
about
that
part.
there's still hope, that he just can't see, I love that.
That's a really good scene.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk Two Towers then.
Don't steal
Two
mine.
Towers.
Don't steal mine.
Okay, then you go first if you have one already.
Sam's speech, dude. Oh my gosh. It makes me cry every time. Like it pulls you out of the it doesn't pull you out of the movie, but it just it zooms out a little bit from the story that's going on, and it gives you
It's like we're teaching here.
It's like Tolkien is, or maybe I don't know if Tolkien, if it was in the book, or like whoever wrote that moment, it's like them talking to you straight up and just being like, it's gonna be okay. And I'm just, oh my god, it's so good. Oh my gosh.
I definitely thought that on my last run through that Two Towers was definitely the darkest when it came to the tone of the three films. I feel like that's more of the most dramatic or the darkest one is the Two Towers. And so when you get that from Sam at the very end, it just kind of helps to clear the darkness and bring you back to that positive message.
Yeah.
And if anyone listening doesn't know what we're talking about, it's when Frodo is being kind of sucked in by the Nazgul, and then Sam tackles him, and he gets on top of Sam with his sword and almost kills him, but then realizes what he's doing, and then Sam proceeds to give him a speech.
Basically, what it says at the end is that there's good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for.
Oh,
I just love that.
Don't stop.
I think weirdly enough, it's one of the darker
dude.
moments in the film. But I think my favorite moment is King Theoden. Really a broken king at that point. Talking to Gimli and just being like, "What can men do against such reckless hate?" And him just "Would you ride with me?" And they're literally the last people standing. You don't realize how many people die in that battle until you look at him up in the very the throne room, I guess, as you can call the most closed off chambers of Helm's Deep, and you're like, holy crap, there's 20 people left. They started with all the elves. There's no elves left. I don't see any of them. There's barely any of the King's Guard left. And the main characters, because plot armor.
Plot armor, of course.
There's no one left. He's lost all of the men. And then, well, not all of them, because then you see the Aeolingus, but that moment just before they go charging over the hill and through and knocking all the Uruk-hai off, just that moment where he's like, "Will you stand with me?" I feel like that's I don't know. I just love that moment because there are moments where I've been able to come to my friends and my support system around me and just say, "Are you standing with me? I'm okay," and I always know that I am because you guys are always there. I love that moment.
And to add kind of to that, that's also kind of when Theoden accepts that Aragorn is also a king, that Aragorn is a leader, because earlier in Edoras, when they're talking about fleeing to Helm's Deep and what they should do, just after Theoden's been released from Saruman's spell, when Aragorn says that open war is upon you, whether you would will it or not, and then Theoden says, when last I checked, Theoden, not Aragorn, was king of Rohan. But at that moment, he's accepting help from Aragorn, and it just adds so much more weight to that scene too. So,
yeah.
I honestly think that one of my favorite moments is the March of the Ents.
Ooh, yeah.
That's
Like
a really yeah.
there's a profound kind of message in the Two Towers about like nature because Christopher Lee actually talks about this a great deal in the extended edition, the cast commentary. He talks about like the environmental message and how Saruman was mistreating nature and it came back to hurt him in the end.
Climate change, yo.
Yeah, and stuff like that. How if you mess with nature, it's gonna mess back, and I just think that's done so well with the March of the Ents. Not just because it's a freaking cool sequence, because
Yeah.
it is, but I just think it's a really great message.
I think it's weird that none of us mentioned the freaking Rohirrim coming over the hill.
I mean,
That's kind of the
scene
same
is
the most
cool,
obvious one.
but
The most obvious one, I guess.
It's I think it kind of goes along with yours, Ryan, is that's both fourth Erlangos, but they are two different moments. I see what you're saying, but yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that kind of is part of yours as well. That hope was on the horizon, you just couldn't see it yet. Anyway, now the big one, Return of the King.
Gosh, this is hard. This
Too
is
many
so
moments
hard.
here. There's so many.
We're probably gonna have to do more than one for this
Okay,
one.
okay. I'm just gonna kick it off. What's a really powerful moment that I've been thinking about a lot lately is Aragorn coming into his own and accepting that he is the king, because like he's been running away from that for a while, you
Yeah.
know. And
Which I
then that
think is what
moment
the
where
movies
Elrond
did
says,
better.
"Put away the
Yeah.
ranger, be the king." Like I don't quite remember what it is, but it's something along the lines of "Put away
I know
the
the
ranger."
quote. It's like put away the ranger, become the man you were born to be.
Oh, it's so good. I just love that moment where he's like, "This is who I am. I have a city who needs me." I feel like in his head he's like remembering his words to Boromir. I will not let the White City fall.
And it kind
Yeah.
of adds weight to that scene too with Elrond because you realize that Elrond basically raised him because his father was killed by orcs and his mother died getting him to Rivendell. So Elrond was basically Aragorn's father, which just adds so much to that scene because it becomes like a
He's the
father-son
mentor
talk.
character, like in every single fantasy story has,
Mhm.
you know. And gosh, that's just a really powerful moment.
Yeah,
Okay, Justin,
and
you go.
I think well, just to add to that, like it's such a good change from the book to the movie. Not that the book version is bad, but giving Aragorn an arc, because in the book, doesn't he have Anduril like by
Yeah, he
this?
has the sword from the beginning.
Yeah, so it and maybe even in the books he maybe is a little resistant to being king, but the sword is a visualization of him becoming the king. When he stops, like you might think like if he's not believing in him, if he wasn't believing in himself and tried to block the dead king's slash, he probably would have died. But because he finally accepted it and believed it, the magic of this sword let him control the ghost army, which is just so cool.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Favorite seed? Okay, maybe I don't know. There's too many, but man,
Just start
poor
with one.
Frodo, dude.
Oh my
Oh my
gosh.
Oh
gosh.
gosh, I got chills.
Ah,
You can't get like that's the thing.
jeez.
You get chills just thinking about it. You know.
It's so good because like I in the original like I don't know were they were gonna have him like fight Sauron and like Sauron
That
was
would have been
like
cool.
corrupting him, but they kind of just couldn't cut it out because you see him like put his sword down and start like looking at Sauron and you're like, wait, what's happening? Is he what? But then he turns around and he's like tearing up and it's not a scream. There's no music. He just
It's just for
says
Frodo.
for Frodo and then by himself is just running at the army. Doesn't even probably doesn't care if people follow him or not. He's just like, I don't care.
And at
It's
that
the same.
moment, you actually hear the Fellowship theme again, like as strong as it's been since the Fellowship of the Ring.
Oh,
Yeah, dude.
I love it.
I think this is a weird moment to be. Well, it's not weird. It's connected right at that moment where right where Frodo is trying to throw the ring into the fire, you know, cast it, whatever. But it's that moment, and I love it where he's at the very end. He's done the best he can possibly do. He's gone through the Shire to Mordor. He's done it. He's there. But as he's there, he fails. Frodo failed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he took it and like my grandpa, like, he took the books that we have and he wrote all over them, you know. So I have his notes written, scrawled all over our copies of Lord of the Rings. And whenever he sees the ring, he's always comparing it to like temptation or addiction, and just like that, like just or any kind of feeling like depression or like all of those different feelings that like that can kind of come, like, you know, just any kind of that negative, like compounded feeling that's just always there, you know. And I love that moment where Frodo fails, and that's kind of confusing. But like, I love it where like, because it shows that like you're going to fail, you're going to do the best you possibly can, and then still sometimes fail, because and then compound that with both Sam and um uh well, Aragorn and all of them marching and running to fight off the demons, I guess, whatever, you know, for Frodo, you know, because like I feel like when I'm in my darkest moments, it's always my friends who are there screaming and charging and fighting off whatever demons I have in my head, whether they know it or not, you know. I love that moment. It's so powerful because Sam is like, no, I'm like, he doesn't know what to do. You know, he's doing the best, but then like all of his friends, you know, fighting for him, you know, and then Sam catching him as he falls off the cliff right on the like the edge, you know, and I relate to that so much and I love it, you know. I just love that,
So
like,
good.
it's, I don't know, it's just so beautifully done.
It's so good, dude.
Okay, so I don't really have, like, I guess one moment that I want to talk about, but rather the fact that it's got so many endings. Like, I hear people complain about that sometimes.
Come
like,
on.
it's got way. They say
Get
like it's
out.
got way too many endings, and like you think it's gonna end, but then nope, there's another ending. But like the last time I watched it through, every one of those endings has a purpose, because the first ending would be Frodo and Sam, when Frodo says, "I'm glad to be with you, Samwise Gamgee," at the end of all things, right? The screen fades to black, but then it fades back in. That, to me, kind of feels like the ending of The Ring. That's The Ring's ending, right? And then, because at that point, they're like, it's over, it's done, we did it. And then Gandalf swoops in, brings them back with the Eagles, and then you get the scene at Rivendell when Frodo's reunited with the whole Fellowship, minus Boromir.
Is
And
that Rivendell? I thought that was Minas Tirith.
no, that's Rivendell.
So they go to
I'm pretty
Rivendell, then they
sure.
get back to Minas Tirith?
Yeah, because they needed
Eagles.
Elrond to heal
Fast
to
travel.
heal him.
Would
Basically,
you
yeah.
like to fast travel to locations you've already been to?
So that sequence to me kind of feels like the Fellowship's ending, like the ending of the Fellowship that's set out from Rivendell ending in Rivendell, which is kind of great. And then you get Aragorn's ending when he's crowned king, and then you get like the Hobbit's ending at when Sam marries Rosie, and then you kind of get Frodo's ending when he
And
leaves Middle Earth, Frodo and Bilbo's ending when they leave Middle Earth, and then you get Sam's ending. Because for me, it feels kind of like the three biggest main characters are Frodo, Sam, and Aragorn, right? And so those three characters all get their own ending, which I think is really cool.
Like, why are you complaining, man? Like, did you?
It's more Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, it's just, and it also like makes you bawl your eyes out. So like, you know, emotions are a thing.
But I think we were talking about this last time we watched Lord of the Rings, but I think my favorite moment is when the four hobbits are in the Green Dragon and they're all sitting together after all of this that's happened, and they're just kind of sit there like they don't know what to do. You like the message in that is like you can never go back. Like after all the things they've been through, they can't go back to the life they had because they're scarred by the things they've seen.
Always breaks me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And it goes back to Tolkien with his experience in World War One, because people come back from wars like that and they're never the same. You know, the scars run too deep.
yeah. We have to talk about the charge of Rohan on Pelennor Fields. Like, oh my gosh, it's so good.
I feel like that's really Theoden's kind of. It's part. It works really well with Theoden's arc because again
Because
with Helm's
he starts
Deep.
out as that poisoned king who's cursed and like weak,
Yeah.
you know, and then he's this triumphant, heroic, just legend.
Mm-hmm. Like he sees these Mumakil coming in from the distance, an enemy he knows that he can't win, but he sounds the charge anyway. He still goes after the Mumakil. and he's trying to rally the Rohirrim when the Witch King eventually kills him.
Yeah. Oh, dude. The charge of Rohan is so epic. So epic.
And I gotta say, I do love the Rohirrim theme that plays when they charge. It's
Oh god,
so
it's,
good.
it's subtle but it's strong, and like it's just a march, and it's just okay. Another great scene and another great character is Eowyn.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
There should always be more women. I don't care what you say. There should always be more women shown as strong characters. Whatever position they are in, there should always be more. But I just love how her character like isn't like she is just strong in her own right, no matter what. You know, and it kind of sucks that she had to play off as a man in the beginning, but then like okay, weird reference here, but Sam Riegel's wife, for a long time, she's a director of photography for all these like really famous films and stuff. And for the longest time on IMDb, it was listed as she was listed as a
Oops.
man, you know, just because like
Oh wow.
she didn't know. And like for the longest time, she's like, you know, at first I was mad, but then I was okay with it because like it meant that like my gender wasn't an important part of like whatever judgment they were making. They were solely judging
Yeah.
my work there, which was great, you know. And so I think
And
it's
that's
super cool. Where, like it doesn't matter at first, like whether she is a woman or a man, but then like it's yes, she is a woman, and then she, as a woman, claiming her role as strong and powerful, freaking kills the Witch King, you know.
And like
And
the only thing I'll say about that is like if they're written to be a great character, then it doesn't matter the traits they have. But if you write a character around that one trait, like the fact that they are a woman or that they're something else, that's when it kind of feels forced, like you're
I
pushing
feel
an
like that
agenda.
happens to a lot of minority characters in stories.
Yeah, like they're trying to be inclusive and they're trying to throw all these people's in, but they they make their character solely the fact that they are that minority, and that's when it feels forced and it feels like that's when you get characters like Rey. However you may think about that, she feels kind of like
I just feel like they missed out on making
she
us
was
like
written as
an
a
authentic
woman
character.
first and a great Jedi second.
I
You know?
so badly wanted Rey to be like just like one of the best characters, like Bastila Shan or Satil Shan, you know, like
Or even
Ahsoka,
Ahsoka.
you know.
Yeah,
I
man.
just think, like, and not that like I mean, which is such a like you should make like a woman shouldn't be like I don't why are we talking about this? We're a bunch of white men. Like
You're right.
I think it's like a woman like being proud and like strong and upfront and like that powerful about that isn't a bad thing. But like when that's like the only thing presented, like it's just I don't know. It's just weird.
Which is why Eowyn is such a great character because
She
she
is such a
has
strong character because she's
motivations and
authentic.
all that stuff. Yeah, she's a real person.
I
She's
think
not
I think
pushing
it's
an agenda.
I think well, and besides that, like I think it's really cool when you can write a character that is authentic and still, you know, it's representing and like proving a point, but it's like I think it can be like I think people do this a lot to minorities, you know, like they can do it like I've seen it happen to a lot of black characters where um I think they marginalize and they just like make it so it's like the black characters are like in a show are either like all good or all bad, you know, instead of like that's a person, you know, and I feel like that happens in our society a lot, you know, where like even today we're seeing a lot of that. I don't know, I'm going on a weird tangent right now, but like they put them like there's like you don't understand that that's a person, you know, and I feel like we shove things into like a category and like that's all that we judge it by.
Yeah, and that's
I just
the
love
thing
seeing the
about
authentic
Eowyn.
character.
That's the thing about Eowyn is she's a great character, not like she's a great character and she's a woman, not that she's a great character because she's a woman, you know? Like she's just a great character regardless.
Can I don't think I ever fully understood. Was she able to kill him because she was a woman or just like she says I am no man, but is it just because she stabbed him in the right spot? Like I'm not like trying
No.
to like
I think
be
it's because she
picky. I'm
stabbed him in the
I'm
face.
genuinely curious how like what
The thing about the Witch King's death is the fact that he was weakened by Mary, sorry. He was weakened by Mary first because Mary's like a half man, you know. He's not a man in the sense of he's
So
a
is it
human,
actually like a
but
curse
he
that
is,
no man can kill him?
yeah. And
Oh,
that's the thing about the Witch King. He was weakened by Mary because he
he's not
was,
a man, quote
but he
unquote.
Well,
was a male.
when he
So he
says
was,
man, he's just saying like everyone, like you can't be killed by a human. Kind of how like the Bible says man, but they're really talking about humanity.
yeah, no, it's literal. It's in the literal sense of he can't be killed by a man, as in a male. So while Mary is of the male gender, he is also a halfling. He's not human necessarily, which is why he can weaken the Witch King but not kill him. You know?
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Does
And
Tolkien talk about that, or is it just kind
well,
of like
I would honestly love to talk more about the Witch King because he's got a really, really cool story before the Lord of the Rings, like with the downfall of or the downfall of Arnor and the
I
Witch King's
wanna, yeah.
kingdom in Angmar.
Now that we've kind of like we're slowly starting to finish off with the movies, do we want to talk about the books a little more?
Or we can talk about like the extended universe, things that aren't necessarily referenced solely in a book, but just like about the Tolkien universe.
Connor,
So
I think
like,
that's you.
so I want to talk about like the Witch King. I think he's such a cool character, and I would love to see more of him in like, I guess, TV show format or something. But the Witch King story goes like, um, he was sent out by Sauron to weaken the kingdoms of men in the north. Right? You had at that time in the Second Age there were two kingdoms of men. There was the kingdom of Gondor and the kingdom of Arnor. Gondor is the one everyone knows and loves. It's the one in the south, but in the north was the Dunedain and the kingdom of Arnor. Arnor was split into three regions. It was Cardolin, Rudar, and a
I'm
third
looking
one
at
that I
my map
can't
on my wall real
remember.
quick. One sec.
And then the Witch King took up Angmar, and there's actually a really great game about the Witch King, Rise of the Witch King for Battle for Middle Earth. Basically, what happens is he took over the two weakest kingdoms of Arnor with little to no resistance, right? And then he lays siege to Weathertop, the watchtower of Amon Sul, because he wanted to grab the Palantir, which was there, because at the time all of the Palantir were still accounted for. And so when he did, he attacked Amon Sul, and he was successful. But the king of Arnor escaped with the Palantir and took its Fornost, which was the capital of Arnor. And so the Witch King, when he finally attacked Fornost, he actually was successful, and he captured the city of Fornost, and then he won. Like the Witch King won. He did what Sauron sent
So
him out
this
to
is the
do.
reason that I'm looking at my map now. It's called the Lost Realm of Arnor
Exactly,
because of
because
the
the
Witch
Witch
King.
King,
He made it the Lost Realm.
he destroyed Arnor, and it's the reason that the Dunedain, or the men of the North, like Aragorn, are just scattered remnants. They're just in chieftains now, not the great kingdom that they were. But the Witch King was thrown down when the King of Gondor
So wait,
united with
okay,
the
sorry,
elves.
pause. Is
Okay,
Aragorn's mother of Arnor then? Because obviously his father and all that line comes from.
no, actually, I believe she is part Elven.
Oh,
Yeah, which I could be wrong about that though. So I'm not really sure.
because
But
like,
yeah,
because it's
his
always like
father
gifted,
was
like he's one
chieftain.
of the Dunedain gifted with long life. How?
Well, that's the thing actually is um all of the men at that time were actually, as far as I know, actually had that long life, but they lost the kingdoms of Arnor never lost that long life. They were just destroyed
Oh,
by the Witch King. But the men of Gondor, there was actually a plague that
oh,
lessened their life, and which is why Gondor is in such ruin when we get to the Lord of the Rings. Why the city of
because both the
Osgiliath.
city is physically in ruins and the people are
Yeah,
actually
there was a terrible
real.
plague. There were
Wow.
wars with the different kingdoms of men, like with the Haradrim and stuff like that, and Umbar. And then, um, yeah, that's kind of what happened to the kingdoms of men by the time. And until Aragorn takes the throne, the kingdoms of Arnor and Gondor are separate. Anyway, back to the story of the Witch King, because I just love this story. The King of Gondor unites with the elves of Rivendell and the Grey Havens, and they actually assault Fornost again, and they kick the Witch King out, drive him all the way back to Angmar, and once they destroy his fortress, the Witch King escapes, and the King of Gondor actually chases the Witch King, but the leader of the Elven armies, Glorfindel, tells him not to. He says no, his doom is already decided.
So that scene in The Hobbit where Gandalf actually finds the grave of the Witch King, that is accurate to where he's from, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that actually is where he's buried then.
Yeah, as far as I know, at least. But yeah, actually, Glorfindel is probably one of my favorite characters in the extended lore of Tolkien, because Glorfindel was an elf of the Second Age who fought in the siege of Beleriand, or however you say it, the kingdoms of the elves in the Second Age during the First War against Morgoth or Melkor, whichever one, and he actually slays a Balrog by himself, dies like Gandalf, and is brought back to life, and then is the one to defeat the Witch King in combat and causes him to flee. Glorfindel is just so cool.
Which was is Glorfindel in the movies, or is that
No,
a different elf?
But actually, Glorfindel.
Who was the elf that died at Helm's Deep?
That's Haldir.
Okay.
But Glorfindel was actually supposed to be the one in the books. He's the one who rescues Frodo from the Ringwraiths. Yeah,
oh, that's
but
okay.
They chose to replace it with Arwen, which I think is a great change. Actually,
it was a good choice, because also you'd introduce Glorfindel, and I would be like, "Who the f is this?" And then he
never shows up again for the rest of the movie.
Yeah,
the rest of the books. But there's actually a theory that he's seen in the movies just once. When Aragorn is being crowned king, he's standing behind Elrond when Aragorn and Arwen reunite.
Yeah,
which is actually really cool.
So, on Weathertop, when Aragorn fends off the Nazgul, is the Witch King there?
Mm-hmm.
Is he the one? He's the one that stabs Frodo.
Yeah, he is the one who stabs Frodo.
So, did he get his crown mask during the time of the movies?
Yes, he does. You actually see in the extended edition when Gandalf is talking to Pippin about what's coming, when Pippin's like, "We have the White Wizard that's got to count for something, right?" And then Gandalf kind of looks off.
Sauron has yet to reveal his most terrible,
deadly servant.
Blah, blah, blah.
And that's when you see the Witch King being armored up.
Okay, because I'm just wondering.
Unnecessarily.
Did he just when he was raiding, did you say Angmar? Is Angmar where he?
Angmar is the kingdom of the Witch King. Arnor is the kingdom of men. They're very similar. Yeah.
What's the difference? Sorry, this is gonna just turn into Wikipedia of what's the difference between Eriador and Arnor? Arnor fell, but what is Eriador then? Is that just
so Eriador is more more of a continent scale. The continent of Eriador, because it goes all the way from
the Shire and old Arnor and all that. Okay.
And Arnor is the remains of the kingdom of men that was destroyed by the Witch King.
Okay.
So when he destroyed Arnor, was he a Nazgul?
Yes, he still was at the time.
Was he all cloaked up? Did he look like just a regular Nazgul when he did it?
No, he looked like he did when he confronts Gandalf.
Oh, so that's his battle armor that he's always had. Okay.
Yeah,
I thought that was new.
The term often associated with Angmar is the Iron Crown, because that's what his helmet is called.
I really want a story of somewhere, somehow, of the Battle of Erebor with everything else going on with
hold on.
Minas Tirith. I want
There's actually there's a game called The Battle for Middle-earth 2, right? It's one of my favorite games. I don't know how canonical it is, but from what I've heard, it's very, very closely accurate. So the story goes that Glorfindel, the one I was talking about before, teams up with Gloin, Gimli's father, and Elrond sends them out to unite the elves and dwarves.
Was it Gloin in
North.
The Hobbit?
Yeah, he was actually.
Okay, he was the old one.
Yeah, when Legolas captures the dwarves in Mirkwood, he takes something from Gloin and he's looking at a family portrait. And he's like, "What is this creature?" The Goblin Mutant. And Gloin's like, "That's my wee lad, Gimli." It was a fun cameo. I actually enjoyed that part.
That was funny. That was really funny.
But no, the story of the War in the North goes that Elrond sends Glorfindel and Gloin to unite the elves and dwarves of the North.
That story.
There's kind of some big battles that go on. First, the Corsairs of Umbar and the the goblins of the Misty Mountains and the Ettenmoors assault the Grey Havens, where the ships leave Middle Earth, right? And they're under siege for like a few days before the dwarves of the Blue Mountains come and save them, and then the elves and dwarves unite to go and fight in the east after
So
they
is that wait?
defeat
Is
the goblins.
Thranduil involved in that and all?
Yes, he is, because there's actually the dwarves of the orcs of Dol Guldur attack Thranduil's halls. They attack Mirkwood at the exact same time they're attacking Erebor, so that the elves can't help to
Dude, that's
like
such a
defend
cool
Erebor.
story.
But
That would
so
be the
so here's
story
what
that we
happens.
got a little bit in The Hobbit, but like
hmm
the movies. But like, oh my gosh.
And so here's what happens. King Dane is left alone to defend Erebor, right? And so there's a battle at Lake Town where they fight off the first wave, but they learn that more and more orcs are coming, so they fall back to Erebor and they like reinforce it, right? And so there's a battle in the city of Dale, and then they fall back to the mountain and they huddle up there, right? And so there's a big, huge siege that goes on for Erebor until the elves of Mirkwood finally show up and they relieve the siege. And then what happens after that is probably my favorite part, but all the elves and dwarves of the north assault Dol Guldur. They assault the fortress and they tear it down, and Galadriel actually uses the last of her magic from her elf ring to totally destroy Dol Guldur. And it is just the
Wait, that's
coolest story.
Galadriel?
Galadriel
Jeez, what happened to your
destroys Dol
mic,
Guldur.
Ryan?
So that is. Gosh,
Yeah, what happened to your mic? What the heck?
give me a sec.
But yeah, this is just based off the game. The only things that I know happened was the Siege of Erebor. I know that actually did happen, but most of that is just based off of a game.
Okay.
It still would have been a really cool story to see, though.
That would have been so cool.
Can you imagine a game playing as the Witch King?
It does exist. I have it.
Is that what the
Battle for Middle Earth
game is? Oh,
yeah.
So you're commanding
the Witch
the
King's
forces.
Dane from the Iron Hills.
Oh,
Like,
can you like send the
oh
Witch
my
King
God.
out onto battle?
Yeah, you control the Witch King.
Okay,
It's
you know,
Or,
such a cool game.
you know
I
like
was
that-
watching gameplay of it, but it looked like
It's so
like you
cool.
were controlling dwarves, and I was like, what is going on?
Well, that is the Battle for Middle Earth too, but the Rise of the Witch King is an expansion for that.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Okay, that makes a lot of sense now.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal game. It's so fun.
like some sort of game like on a mobile or anything of like an actual like at the end of time's battle you've got like the stuff going down in like Gondor with like Minas Tirith and all those battles going up there, but then you also get to like play up here and like Clash of Clans but actually cool with Lord of the Rings. So you're actually playing all those like battles and stuff with like Glorfindel and like Dane and all them like all there and then everywhere. You know, wouldn't that be so cool?
That's why
Mhm.
Conquest should get a sequel, but it should be
Oh,
more
absolutely.
like more accurate instead of like mages running around and like literal flame swords, but like like that same like gritty gameplay, but like we're playing in battles that we only hear about and not see. Like, of course, like I'd want to fight in Helm's Deep, but I also like it'd be
We've already
sick
done
to
that.
play as the Witch King and fight in the Battle of Arnor. Like that sounds like really awesome. Or like, and you
Yeah,
can
I've
like
got
play
a-
both sides.
Yeah, I've got a book here. It's called Tolkien, a dictionary, and here's what it says on Erebor. Let's see.
I have that
The dwarves returned to Erebor, and King Dane II re-established the wealth and fame of the Kingdom of the Mountain. During the War of the Ring, the forces of Sauron attacked and besieged Erebor. However, once the ring was destroyed, the forces of darkness melted away, and the dwarves and their allies, the men of Dale, drove off the orcs and Easterlings that besieged them. So the siege lasted all the way until the ring was destroyed, which is crazy.
You have the Atlas of Tolkien?
Yes, I do actually. I have the Atlas,
Atlas
the
and the
Heroes, and the dictionary.
Oh, I have the encyclopedia. Suck it.
Well, you know what? I better get
Jeez,
that.
dude. Jeez.
Where is Erebor? Such a weird way to split this up.
The side note, the Shadow of War Sauron actually looks pretty sick.
Oh yeah,
The movie
he's designed
version
really well.
and the game version, they just look really cool.
Hmm.
But like his helmet is long in the movies. Got a long
Yeah.
helmet.
I do really like how they explored in the Shadow of War games how Sauron was able to take a fair form, and how he was able to deceive the elves of Aragorn to help him form the
But
Rings of
even
Power.
his like normal form, it looked untrustworthy, man. Like I looked at him, I was like, okay, Mr. Yellow Red Eye boys, like chill out.
So
Yeah.
many different stories, and I guess we're probably gonna have to start winding down because we've been going for a long
Finish
time.
soon. I'll probably go into another room.
There's so many stories from Tolkien that, like, I mean, you have the Silmarillion, then you have the Children of Hurin, and then like all those other stories and the Lost Tales that his children put together after. I mean, there's just so many other stories that like just haven't been told.
Oh yeah, and I really think we could expand even more upon Tolkien's world. Like there could be so much more that we can explore in games and movies and TV shows that I just really want to see.
Yeah. Or like
Yeah.
I would
even
love.
like the Fourth Age is where like people could start writing their own, but like
Don't
that's
screw it
so-
up though.
Don't screw it up.
I really would love to go more in depth into the story of the Battle for Middle Earth and like the War in the North. It's just such a cool story.
Dude, I'd like an Assassin's Creed like game, but you're playing as Strider.
Oh yeah.
For those of you who don't know, that's Aragorn before, it's his fake name as a ranger. But like, or just like playing as a ranger, or like playing as Faramir, and just like that kind of like bow hunting combat and just like sword combat. Like
There actually is a really cool fan film on YouTube called The Quest for Gollum, or The Hunt for Gollum, or something like that. It's like an independent fan-made film, but it explores Aragorn because before the War of the Ring, he was actually in the north searching for Gollum, so he could try to find him before Sauron did, so he could protect the location of the ring, protect the Shire, you know.
yeah,
So you should definitely check it out. The Hunt for Gollum.
yeah. I just
on
looked
YouTube.
it up. Looks pretty good actually.
I mean, the actors are okay, but besides that, it's really, really good.
Yeah, the Aragorn actor looks kind of
Yeah.
flat. I don't know. Like
He kind of is.
I just like I think the reason I love Shadow of Mordor so much is just the fact that you just get to mess around. Like you literally have the
Yeah.
powers of a wraith. Like I made a D&D class like based off I actually kind of like copied it, but then I sort of changed some things. But like, and I did it in Curse of Strahd. Jaden ran Curse of Strahd, and I played this character, and it actually worked well into the story of Curse of Strahd, but it wasn't quite like not saying that it's bad, but it wasn't quite like what I wanted. But like for Curse of Strahd, the way it worked. But just I don't know why the Wraith stuff just like interests me so much. It's so cool. And like Wraiths in D&D aren't what Wraiths are in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So like I feel like
Yeah.
if I like showed someone or like posted this custom Wraith class, people would be like, why don't you just pick the race or something? Like, like I'm like, bruh, this is not the same, dog.
Yeah, I mean, well, D&D is hard anyways because I mean, D&D is well, I mean, just like in D&D mythos anyways. Even just pick one world like the Forgotten Realms. There's so much lore, but it's all like
Yeah.
scattered. Whereas like with Tolkien, it's this like one god, like Iluvatar, then all this other stuff that went down, and even above Iluvatar, he has the one. But like even sorry, distraction, but like he is like one line of like history that goes all the way down.
Tolkien's world building just astounds me. I just can't believe how much work and how thought out and thorough the world building of Middle Earth is. Like there's so much that went into the first, second, and third age. It's incredible.
Nuts.
No.
Trying to read through that and figure it all out without like a condensed book that helps you do that is like it's like trying to study the Bible. It is
Yeah.
dense.
And even the Bible isn't the whole story with like a lot of Christian beliefs. So there's a lot. There's a lot.
Yeah.
And we love you, Tolkien.
Oh, it's just so good, man. So good.
Well,
Now I am kind of excited to see what I heard they're planning a series based in Middle Earth, like a Hulu series or an
it's gonna
Amazon
be Aragorn.
series. Is it?
Don't mess it up. Don't mess
Please,
it up.
Oh
please
yeah,
don't.
it's confirmed. It's young Aragorn.
Okay, that's
As a
actually I'm really
ranger.
excited to see that. What that
Don't
can
mess
look
it
like.
up.
Yeah.
Dude, that just sounds so good. Just sounds so good. There's like so many things they could do.
Well,
All right. Well, we could stop there.
forgot how to end it. Help.
Yeah. Maybe just start talking, and I'll just cut you off. Just kidding. No, but if anyone's listening, thanks. I don't know how long you lasted. I mean, if you're interested in Lord of the Rings lore, then you could have listened to that last part. But to each their own. But we definitely should do more Lord of the Rings ones and maybe explore some Harry Potter. And, of course, every podcast is going to somehow tie in with Star Wars in some way or another. So,
Because of course it does.
yeah, it's just the way things go. But thanks for listening, guys, and we'll catch you next time.
Yeah, thank